I've, in this last 16 years, spoken to presidents and leaders of foreign countries, and I still think the hardest thing in the world, at least for me, is to talk about me and my life. So I'm going to just barrel through this thing because it's not in my nature to do that. And when subjects become very personal, it's hard not to convey that. But in talking with Tom, and I think I got a story to tell, and if there's any way what I've been through and what I've experienced is of any help to anybody else, then I want to be able to help. So I'm going to give you the life story of George Radanovich. Try not to sleep. I was born and raised a Roman Catholic in Mariposa, California. We were a big Catholic family, 8 of us. I was 5th of 8, and really had begun to develop my sense of God at an early age because of attending masses. They were even back in Latin then, and I almost wish they were now, just for the experience of it. But as I grew up and as time passed, I wanted to make sure I had it right. And I didn't want to waste my life. So I ended up getting baptized in Coach Hobby's swimming pool, and when I was at about 17 years old, or close to going into college. And even during that time, I've walked the aisle up on some ministerial fellowships in the convention center in Fresno over the years, and gave my life to Christ, and did my best to make sure that I was saved. I was willing to just do just about any of those things many times in order to know that I could have, be in the presence of God. Along those ways, when I was in my 20s, I met a gentleman by the name of Fred Bigler, and he was he was a probation officer for Stanislaus County. And no, I was not on probation at the time that I met Fred. It was through other routes. But Fred was a biblical scholar. He did it on his own. A wonderful man. And when you're looking at life, and I felt in my time, I didn't want life to pass without doing special things and doing what God wanted me to do, and hopefully that those would be really special things. And Fred was a bit of a godsend to come into my life at the time. He taught me about something I was not familiar with before, and it was about the 4 institutions. And they were basically the institutions that God established during the creation of time in the book of Genesis, and that's the institution of family and work and faith. And after Cain killed Abel, God established the 4th one, government, because to keep anybody from killing Cain. And Fred was amazing because he could, being a probation officer, he saw the worst of the worst in communities, wasted lives, reprobates. He had to deal with them all the time. And he applied his biblical knowledge of these 4 institutions, and he came up with the idea that if a person were properly related to those 4 institutions, they would start life with a great foundation. Those 4, that properly relating is properly relating to the authority figures in those institutions. And essentially, if a child is taught to honor his mother and his father, if he learns how to work, if he maintains a clear conscience before God and obeys the laws of the land, you pretty much guarantee that that person has a good foundation under him to start a great life. What a great thing to have in your 20s when you're wanting to build your life. And Fred was really helpful in turning me on to the 4 institutions. When I went to Washington, there was one thing I thought that I felt most important, and that was the idea of having a purpose while you are there. There's plenty to do being in Congress, representing local issues, having staff that deals with constituent issues like visas to different countries, and for people having trouble getting their Social Security or Medicare checks, those types of things. But over and above and over that, I wanted to impact the direction of the country. And so I started thinking about those 4 institutions that Fred Bigler taught me about. And I thought, if it was so important for God to establish those institutions and reinstitute them after the fall, they're still in effect today, then we ought to be really mindful and concerned about the status, the health, the well-being of all of those institutions, not just the institution of government. I got to the point, one point of frustration, where I came to the conclusion that the only way that we were going to be able to fix all the institutions at one time was to convince every American to tithe, 10%, go to the church, let the church resurrect, you know, the family and the effectiveness of the church. Put it on the shelf out of frustration and let it sit there. I knew my purpose in life, and sometimes I didn't listen to it, and I threw it up on the shelf, and when I did, being in Congress was not a great experience. It was not what it would be. It's all fun there the first couple of years because it's all brand new, and then it gets to be a drag if you're not doing your purpose, and even there, you know, things just become hollow and not right. But it's hard going to Washington and saying, you know, Mr. Speaker, all we need is love. And you got to have a little more than that. So I dropped it and was miserable. And then I got the call. I got a call from Effie, and she said, come home. She said she had been having some stomach problems, and I'm losing my notes, but she had been having some stomach problems and went to the doctor, and they did a sonogram, found a mass in her uterus, and she said, you got to come home. The doctors and the staff put their, grabbed her hands and, sorry, and said, you know, gather your family around you. So it was the beginning of a 3-year journey, and that was obviously pretty tough. I want to give people 3 things that I did in order to survive this, in order to be there 100% of the time for Effie and my son King, who's 12 years old. Because this is like free falling into a dark, silent abyss. You know, it just kind of takes your life and knocks it off the table. The first thing that I did was to admit that I was not up to it. A confession to God saying, I can't do this. And because of that, I got God's grace. And that was the first thing I did. It didn't take me any more than 3 seconds to do that one. That was a must-do. Another thing that I learned was that you can only go 24 hours at a time. I found a great book called Deadly Emotions. It was during one of Effie's chemo treatments. I got it at the lobby of the hospital at the Washington Hospital Center. A timely book, you know how you get those things, and really helped me learn how to get rid of the baggage so I could be mentally healthy and be there for my family. I also ran back to my purpose and began thinking, you know, in that dark abyss, you know, okay, God, what are you trying to tell me? And with the distinct purpose of, if I could do anything, including that, to save my wife, I would. And I went back to that, and I found out a little bit more about charity. I found out that not only do individuals get $300 billion a year, and corporations and foundations give $100 billion a year, there's some other entity out there that's giving, and it's the government, and it's about $800 billion a year to charity. It's your government taxes going to social programs. 66% of all the charity in this country goes to is state-sponsored charity. And we all wonder why we've got such a large dependency base, and why the ratio of payers into the system and those who are not is becoming favorable to those that are not. It's because charity is being misdirected by the state these days, and we're only in charge of 33% of the charity that really changes lives. I know that, come to know that that amount of charity is about 25% of our federal budget. And I also know that 25% of your tax burden goes to state-sponsored charity. 25% of the taxes you pay goes to state-sponsored charity. So it really was not a matter of about, gee, let's all give more to make this thing right. The issue is we're giving enough, we're just doing a really bad job with what we're giving. And the 66% of what we're giving is going to state-sponsored charity, which does not change lives or build independence or do anything for our country. And so I started writing a book, and I wrote the manuscript. It's done now. It's called The New World Order is the Old World Order, and what I used was the Old World Order as a means of solving the problems in this country, using 4 institutions to solve this problem in this country rather than the one of government. And I will tell you, in Washington, everybody is infected with this notion that Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals, all are infected with this notion that if you just give the right people the power in Washington, government's going to fix things. And it's not true. It's just absolutely not true. So the elements of the manuscript are that the pursuit of happiness that is in the Constitution is all about access to these institutions. We as people of faith, we as Christians, pursue happiness in the face of God through these 4 institutions. And if that's the case, and we pursue happiness that way, we have a constitutional right of access to those institutions. We have a constitutional right to a mother and a father. We have a constitutional right to a vocation. We have a constitutional right to love God above all others, and almost as important, love our neighbor as ourselves. And that's where the state has transgressed into the area of faith. And we also have a right to be protected under the law. I'm convinced that change begins with our culture, and that the answers to the problem are private wealth gathered and directed through faith organizations for the specific purpose of rebuilding the family. That's what solves our nation's problems. Government will reduce as a result of that as it reacts to everything else around here. And I'd like to start that here. I'll be introducing the book, but also I've started a foundation, and we hope to do a pilot project here in Fresno. So if you've got any interest in it, let me know. In August of 2009, Ethie King and I did a cross-country trip on our way back to D.C. and had a wonderful time. We went to, actually we didn't go cross-country, we more zigzagged down through Las Vegas and Monument Valley and up to Mount Rushmore, and saw a Cubs game in Chicago. Just had a blast. Through Pittsburgh and down. We love doing road trips, and so this was one of the last things that we did, because after we got back, it was clear that Ethie was going downhill. And after 3 major surgeries, 2 rounds of radiation, 3 rounds of chemo, our options were beginning to run out. This is hard to talk about, but I'm just going to get through it. It's also the time when the Holy Spirit began to move in closer to Ethie. And I remember us having a problem of one kind or another. And Ethie sitting up in bed with this huge smile. If you knew Ethie, she had this beautiful smile. She says, let's talk to my friend about this, because God was becoming much closer to her during that time. And it was about in January where we had to start hospice, and I had the conversation that I had been dreading for about 3 years, and that was having to tell King that his mom was not going to be around much longer. But even after 3 tough years, the hardest part was being without her. John Adams said it best when his wife Abigail died: "I just wanted to lay down and die with her." It's in a way that's hard to understand, though. Ethie's death brought me closer to Jesus. And I remember reading somewhere, I like to read about historians, and it was about Lincoln, who suffered more than anybody while in public office. My gosh, the things that he endured. And he said after his boy died, it just completely broke his heart. It was Willie in the White House. And he mentioned being closer to God after that. And I couldn't get it. You know, because your inclination is to blame God, be mad at God. He wasn't there for you, you know, and in all of this. And it was remarkable to me to hear and to know what a humble man Lincoln was, because you don't get there unless you bend your knee to it. You can keep sad things like that and anger and resentment and not say, okay, God, this is your will, and bend the knee to God. So I know he did, because I had to, and I hated it. The week after the services and everything, the worst time in my life, and yet, obviously the time that you needed God the most, but you're so gosh darn angry at him that it's hard to go along. And I came across a poem, and as out of control as I am now, it'd be even worse if I read it. But I'd love to give this and share this with you as a poem to read when devastating things hit you, because you have to deal with it. You can't let it roll you. You got to get up, and there's a purpose for the rest of your life. And Tom, I would love for you to reproduce this and get it out to folks, but it is basically for anybody that's tired, lonely, sad, confused, and what it does is brings you closer to God. So I'm convinced that the Lord had his own reasons for Effie, but I will tell you that part of Effie's sacrifice was to bring me closer to Jesus. And boy, I hope it sticks. Right now, and Tom, if I can give this to you, I'd love for you to share it to the group, because it is something you ought to keep for those days, that hit you. Back home, everybody knows the story of the winery and how that all turned out, but I got 2 acres of vineyards. And at the same time, put this book out, and if God is willing, I want to change the country still. But I do believe that after 20 years of Washington, if I didn't do anything else, I figured out how to change the country. And I can tell you right now, there's very few other people, if any, back in Washington that really do know how to fix this country. And so that's where it is. And I got through it. It's tough talking about your life, but I'm convinced that God has a purpose for every one of us, and it could be clear as the nose on your face, or it could be something that you really have to struggle to find. It can be either one of those, but to know where you are in relationship to where God wants you is a wonderful thing. I've walked the halls of Congress, and there was a time for me there, and there was a time when I wasn't there, and when it was time to go, it's an empty place that brings no joy. And some people don't quite get that, but I think a lot of people here do. Thank you very much, Tom, for the invitation to speak, and it's just great to be with you guys today.